What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to explain to you the basic concepts of short selling. I'm going to talk about some of the pros, some of the cons of short selling, and how you can actually go about doing this, and also some of the real dangers of short selling. And we're going to get a little bit into something called naked short selling, which is pretty interesting. So in just a second, I'm actually going to hop onto my computer because I made a little presentation, so it should be a lot easier to understand the actual concepts of short selling. I think it'll help a lot to actually see it visually instead of me just talking about it here. So let's go do that right now. I know for myself, when I first started learning about short selling, it probably took a few times to really understand what was going on and to fully comprehend the process. Now, you might be able to just watch this video and fully understand the concepts of short selling, but I do urge you to maybe take some notes or pause the video every now and then just to make sure you know what's going on. So let's just get into it. Let me get on my computer and let's get started. All right, so short selling is essentially just a bet against a stock or a company. So when you buy a regular stock, you make money when the stock price goes up. But when you are shorting a stock, you're going to be making money when the price of the stock goes down. So let's look at an example here so you can see how this works. So say we have Kevin here, and Kevin's been following the stock of a logging company in Vermont. Call them Vermont Logging Company. So VLC is their ticker symbol. So he turns on the news one day and he sees that the government of Vermont is working on passing a bill that would severely hurt the logging industry in the state. So Kevin predicts that the government will pass this bill and that the price of VLC will go down. So how does he actually make money off of this bet? Well, he calls up his banker friend Joe, all right? And Joe has a lot of shares of VLC in his portfolio, and he would be willing to lend Kevin some shares for a few days to allow Kevin to conduct his short selling activity. So the next thing Kevin does is he calls up his friend Dan, and he knows that Dan is looking to buy some shares of VLC, and he says, you know what, how about I sell you 1,000 shares of VLC at market price today, which is $10 per share. And Dan says, you know what, yeah, I really want some shares of VLC. I'll give you market price today, which is $10 per share. He hands over $10,000 to Kevin, and then Kevin goes and he calls up Joe and he says, Joe, do you think you can lend me those 1,000 shares right now? And Joe says, all right, sure, I'm looking to make some money. You know, you can pay me back some interest a few days from now, and that sounds good to me. So Joe gives Kevin 1,000 shares, who then passes them on to Dan. All right, so hopefully you're following along closely here of what is going on here. So now Kevin waits until the bill is passed and the stock price of VLC, say it goes down to $5 per share. So how does he actually make money off of this? Well, he calls up Sarah, and Sarah is another trader who owns VLC, and Kevin says, hey, Sarah, would you be willing to sell me maybe 1,000 shares of VLC for $5 per share, which is the market price today? And Sarah says, yeah, I'm really trying to get out of VLC right now. Here you go. Here's 1,000 shares, and here's $5,000 from Kevin. So Kevin just pays her $5,000. And now what does Kevin do? He gives those 1,000 shares back to Joe, and maybe he gives Joe a couple $100 for his services for lending those 1,000 shares to him. So what just happened here? Joe's pretty happy because, you know, maybe he might have lost some money on his shares, but everybody here has fair transactions of what they did. So they got what they bargained for. So maybe most of these people here lost money, but overall they did have fair transactions, and that's what's really important here. So he got his shares back plus some interest. Sarah, well, she sold her shares at market price, which is a fair transaction. And then Dan here, well, he bought shares at market price, so that's a fair transaction as well. But Kevin here is the happiest out of everyone because he just made $5,000 profit off of this deal. And, you know, I should probably change this to something maybe more like $4,800 or something like that, depending on how much interest he had to pay Joe. But overall, Kevin made a lot of money, and hopefully you can see how that happened. So he basically borrowed shares and sold them. So he sold shares that he didn't even own, and then he bought the shares back and gave the shares back to the person that he borrowed the shares from. Now, on the other hand, short sellers can also lose money. So say that the stock price of VLC goes up to $15 instead of going down to $5 per share. Suddenly, Kevin has to come up with $5,000 to cover himself, and he ends up losing really big. So one variation of short selling is actually called naked short selling, and I'm just going to dip into this just a little bit, and it's actually banned in some countries, and I'll tell you why. All right, so let's say that Kevin asks Joe to lend him some shares, and Joe says, no, I'm really not looking to lend you some shares, but Kevin still wants to make some money. So what does he do? He calls up Dan and he says, Dan, I'll sell you 1,000 shares of VLC for $10 per share, and I'll get them to you within 3 days. And so Dan says, you know what? I'm not in too much of a rush. That sounds fine to me. that sounds fine by me. As long as you get them to me in a few days, I'm happy with that. I really don't mind. So that sounds good. And so for the next 3 days, Kevin will basically pray that the stock price of VLC will go down so that he can actually buy these 1,000 shares and give them to Dan. Now, if VLC goes up to say $15, Kevin still has to buy these shares back. And if VLC goes down to say $5 per share, everything's great and Kevin makes $5,000. But the reason why this variation is called naked short selling is because nobody is covering Kevin's bet. All right. So say the stock price goes down to $5 per share, but no one is willing to sell Kevin 1,000 shares. And suddenly he's in some serious trouble because he just promised Dan 1,000 shares within 3 days. And that's the issue with naked short selling. That's why some countries have banned it. And as you can see, you can certainly make a lot of money by short selling, but you can also lose a ton of money by short selling because theoretically your potential losses could be infinite. The stock price could continue to rise forever and you could continue to lose money forever, while the most profit you could possibly make is doubling your money. So short selling stocks, it's typically done by more serious investors. I personally don't short sell stocks because I find it to be pretty dangerous and I just haven't gotten into it too much. But if you're looking to short sell stocks, just be very careful with it and see if it's even legal in your country. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comment section if you have any questions or comments about what's going on with short selling. And thanks for watching. If you have any video ideas or video requests for future videos, let me know in the comment section below as well. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.